Warning: tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! We're ready to start a new series, and this time we're going to do a push-pull amp. And originally I was going to do a ST35 clone, and then I thought, well, maybe we'll do these as monoblocks. And then they had this shared cathode bias thing going on, and I looked around at some other designs, and I decided to go with the Tubelab's simple push-pull. And the original simple push-pull design by them, which I'm going to call the SPP, and I think they do too, it was on a printed circuit board, and it was designed as a integrated, or maybe it was standalone, but it was a stereo amplifier all on one board. And I want to build these as monoblocks. And given that each output tube has its own cathode bias resistor and all that, it's all separated, I think it's really simple to make this into monoblocks. And the real advantage to monoblocks versus a stereo amp is that the power supplies are completely separate from each other, so that there is no channel crosstalk between the two channels from sagging the power supply affecting maybe what the other channel's doing. And I think in a push-pull amp you have a lot more spikes in current draw than you would in an SE amp, and so I decided to go that route. Now, I bought these transformers a while ago, and I think the ST35 may have had this voltage, which is 660 volts, 330 per channel, and might have been based on that it was powering a stereo amplifier. Now I'm a little concerned that these might be too hot for this amp. So instead of a 5AR4, I'm going to use a 5U4C, which is the Russian indirectly heated rectifier. And I've got 4 or 5 of those here, so that's another reason to use them. And they're super cheap, and they're a slow warm-up tube, so all good stuff. I think it'll tone down the voltage some from this kind of hot power transformer. And then going to be using a choke in the power supply, and I've got 2 different chokes. Got these 157Qs, which I think have 100 ohms of resistance, and then I've also got a pair of 157Ms, which have 250 ohms. So I can choose between the 2 of these chokes to dial in the B+ that we're getting on the plates of these tubes. For this amp, you want to use the Dyna, I think it's Z565s or something like that. I'll put it in the description. But you want to use the ST35 type output transformers. They have a 23% ultralinear tap, and I got a pair of these 25 watt egg cores that are that winding style. There's other people that also make these Dyna clones that are probably a closer clone to the original transformer. I saw that even Musical Power Supply is now making a clone of that transformer, or at least that kind of winding style. And so that's what you want to use for this. Everything I've read said that 23% ultralinear is what an EL84 likes for whatever reason, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to use a 12AT7, just like the original circuit used, and I'm going to show you how I kind of figured out how I'm going to lay this out, and how I determined the chassis size that we're going to need. And I've already put a kind of limited scope BOM on my website along with a schematic, and I'll put the link for that below too. And let's get looking at how I determine what size chassis we want to get, and then do some final thoughts on this. Okay, this is where I want to try to figure out what size chassis I want to use. And again, we're going to be building monoblocks, so I need 2 of these. And I have my kind of little shelf set up where a 12 or 14 by 17 amplifier kind of fills up the space. really can't be much bigger than that. So I'm gonna try. Hammond makes a 8 by 12 by 2-inch thick chassis, and I want to see if I can make all of these components fit on one of those, because they're next to each other with maybe a little space between them. It'd be about 17 inches wide and 12 inches long. Should fit in the space that I have for my tube amplifier that I'm currently using. I can use a pair of these. So here is the EdCore power transformer I have, and I'm going to assume over here on this side, a half-inch narrower. Actually, I could come in here and kind of mark off kind of half-inch and just kind of draw a line along there. That's going to be the new bore. And actually, I'll probably just come in here and fold this over and make the piece of paper that side, or I could have trimmed it off. But anyway, so let's say that's our chassis size. Put the power transformer kind of over in this corner like that. Put the rectifier tube over here. Here's our output transformer. Maybe put it somewhere like that. And then I could put the 9-volt tubes, or the 9-pin tubes, across the front like that. Then the only other real piece I have, gonna have a choke. I'm either going to use this 157Q or a 157M, depending on how much resistance I need to put in the power supply to get the voltage down. Because this power transformer is a little hot. For this amp, if I use this 0330, which is a 660 volt power transformer, which I've got a pair of these, so I want to try to use them, it's going to be pretty high voltage for an EL84 amp. So instead of a 5AR4, I'm going to go with a 5U4C, which is the Soviet indirect heated rectifier tube that's got a pretty good bit of voltage drop. And between that and a 250 ohm resistance choke, that should get the B plus down around 330, which these tubes should be able to tolerate. It's kind of pushing them hard, but if you've been following my channel very long, I like pushing tubes pretty hard, running them pretty hot. So that's what we're going to probably try. And then I can, if I wanted to, I could go to a 5AR4 and jack the voltage up even more and see if the tubes explode. Again, I want to try to get as much power out of this thing as I can. Anyway, looking at the layout here, I think I can if I put this power transformer here, I can probably mount this choke, underneath this, like that, on the inside of the chassis, and then put the power cord coming in over in this area. There should be enough room underneath this tube to run that wiring. Then over here, if I really wanted to, I could put the choke over here too, or mount it like this underneath, like that. That might even be better. And then I'd have some room to put the power supply capacitors around in this area. So I've got some options here. I could mount this to the side like that underneath the power transformer. Yeah, there's several places I could mount this thing. And then another option, I don't know though if I'd have room over here to put this underneath this tube, like in this area back here in the back of the amp, and maybe move this tube socket forward a little bit and try to get the choke away from the power transformer a little bit. But I think there's plenty of room to try to keep the power supply separated back like this from the audio portion, and keep everything with the power supply back here, filter capacitors and everything. And then I've got room right here to do some stuff with. I guess I could potentially, move this tube back a little bit and put the volume control here on the top, or put the RCA jack here on the top. But haven't really decided the layout. I kind of like this with these tubes in a line across the front here. And this little blank space right here really doesn't bother me. I guess we could put some kind of little meter there if we wanted to, just for, to dress it up. And possibly in the future, I may experiment with running fixed bias on these output tubes. And if I do, I'll need a milliamp meter. And I've got a couple little digital milliamp meters that I was planning on using for another project that we could repurpose and use on this one. So that's always an option too. And that gives us a little room there to put something like that. And then my idea is to have the speaker terminals along this side here, close to the output transformer. And then this would be the left channel. And then like reverse everything like this for the right channel. And then have the speaker terminals here. And then not sure how I'm going to do the RCA input jacks, whether I'm going to put them on the front of the amp. I'm not really opposed to having the RCA jacks and the volume control on the front. The other thing I've thought about doing is putting 2 RCA jacks on the right channel on the side, and then have a single volume control for both channels, and then put like an RCA jack maybe here, and then on this the other channel, and just put a jumper RCA cable between the 2 monoblocks, and have one volume control on one of the amps, control the volume on both of them. And I know a lot of people would probably use a preamp with these. I just, I'm not a big preamp fan, so I'm probably going to try to build them as integrateds. But I think a lot of people that build these would probably be building them as power amplifiers and have a preamp with its own volume control on it. And obviously that would work as well. So I think this 8x12 chassis is going to be perfect. It's not going to be too cramped. Should be plenty of room to work underneath it. And going to get a couple of those on order, along with the parts that I didn't have here to build these guys. And so going to get all that stuff on order. Like I said, these power transformers that I'm building this with are a little on the hot side. If I was ordering, some Hammonds or something to use with this, I would be ordering like 300, 0300, or 600 volt center tap power transformers, and then just use a standard 5AR4. But hey, that's not what we're doing here. If you wanted to follow along and do that though, that's probably what I would order, is a 600 volt center tap. Don't do like I'm doing. Do like I say, not as I'm doing. But again, these may turn out great. So, you might want to wait to the end and see how this turns out. But if you're not, a lot of people have built this amp, and they're all saying that a 600 volt center tap's the way to go. So anyway, let's wrap this video up. Well, there you go. I think this 8x12 chassis size is going to be perfect. And as you can see, they're going to be laid out like this, kind of asymmetrically, but then when they're together, they'll look symmetrical, if that makes sense. And I think there's going to be plenty of room underneath where this isn't going to be something hard to build or really crowded together. I think this is going to be a fun project to build. And I think that this is a project that you guys can follow along and build as I'm building mine. I don't feel that this is some kind of experimental thing like that 2747 amp. That was something that I just had to come up with from scratch because I couldn't find a schematic anywhere, or I couldn't find an article anywhere where somebody had built a, SEUL amp using those old tubes with modern circuit design. I mean, I found some circuit designs from back in the day that were using, interstage transformers that nobody makes anymore, or they're, if they do, they're like $1,000 each. That, we weren't going to go that route. So, I didn't want to publish the schematic ahead of doing the project myself and finishing it and listening to it and testing it. But in this case, this is someone else's design. Again, this is Tubelab's, and I'm going to put a link below to their website. If you're a true beginner and the idea of doing point-to-point wiring is scary to you, order one of their circuit boards. They're $35 plus, I think, $8 shipping. And I went ahead and ordered one because I wanted to support, the design work that he had done on this. I'm not even sure if I'm going to end up using the circuit board, but I felt bad just kind of stealing his design and making this video series. I may end up at some point building kind of here's a real beginner project. Let's do it with the circuit board as a integrated amplifier, and then use maybe those musical power supply, $160 transformers, and maybe experiment with some different kinds of power transformers and stuff, to try to, build a lower budget version of this. But I've got this iron, and these power transformers don't have enough current for one of these to drive the amp. They have 125 milliamps, and you need at least 175, if not 200 milliamps to drive that if we were going to do it as a single or an integrated stereo amp. So I kind of have to do this as monoblocks. So that's what we're going to do. And you guys said you wanted to see some monoblocks. Here they are. Plus, I'm going to probably be pushing these things kind of hot. So again, if you were going to build this at home following along, the only thing that's kind of experimental about this is me using this 660 volt center tap transformer. Everything I've read says you want to use a 600. It needs to be like 300, 0, 300, center tap with a 5 volt and a 6.3 volt. And then use a 5AR4 rectifier. You'd use one of the lower ohm chokes like this 157Q. If you were going to build it as a single instead of as monoblocks, you need to make sure that it can handle 200 milliamps because these won't, etc. That's why the BOM doesn't go into that much detail. And again, the BOM that I'm listing is the parts list that came from Tubelab's, and I bumped up the values of the resistors as far as their current. There's a lot of them he had at 1/4 watts. I usually try to use at least 1 watt. I think they sound better than the little tiny resistors do, especially when they're in the signal path. And nowadays, Vichy makes these 1 watt power resistors, not power resistors, but 1 watt resistors that are as small as most of the little 1/4 watt carbon ones used to be, and they're metal film. So I'm building it completely with metal film capacitors with a 1 watt minimum, and then some 2 and 3 watt ones where they're needed. The other thing that I'm going to be doing different in mine is he was using the cement type power resistors, and I'm going to go with my tried and true, like I've done on all my amps, kind of my signature thing of using the chassis mount resistors, and I'm going to top mount them here in front of this transformer so that the heat isn't trapped underneath the amp. And I know some of you people are like, they don't like the idea of having voltage exposed. I don't have any pets or kids that are going to get into it, and I live alone, so it's like I don't have to worry about somebody getting electrocuted, and I don't think the bias voltage on one of these amps is high enough to really electrocute somebody. At the worst, you might get a little tingle. So not gonna dive into that too deeply, but that's how I'm gonna build mine. And then I've got my little tube rings that I use. I've already got a nice volume knob and stuff. Like I said, I may end up putting both the input jacks on one side of this channel, and then in here have like a RCA jack and RCA jack, and put a little jumper cable between the two amps, so I have one volume knob for both amplifiers. Not sure yet. And you can build it any way you want. And that's the cool thing about DIY, is you can build it however you want for the space you've got. You could build them sideways if you wanted to, and have them, have it long and narrow if that fits your space better. If you got a narrow shelf, you could build them that way. So that's like I said, that's the cool thing about DIY. But anyway, the BOM isn't super detailed. It's just got like tube sockets. You get the kind you want. It doesn't have like the power switch on there, or the exact this, that, and the other stuff, but it does have all the resistors and capacitors and stuff you could need, and you can go ahead and order all that stuff. But think ahead about you're going to need a power switch. You're going to need some way of hooking up the power cord, whether you want to direct wire it with a grommet, or whether you want to use an IEC connector, how you want to fuse it. I'm going to fuse mine in the connector. You might want to have the IEC connector with the power switch made on it, because they make those and have it all in one piece back there and not have to wire up any of that. So those are decisions you can make that I don't want to make for you. But again, I think this could be a fun series for you to build along with me, because there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of these amps made. There's tons of threads on DIY Audio and probably on Audio Karma about these amps, and some little tweaks and stuff you can do to them. And that's the other reason that I'm building mine point to point, is I may end up trying fixed bias on it later, or try some different way of doing the cathode bias, etc., and see what kind of power effects that has on the amp. And so it's a lot easier to do some modifications when you're doing point to point wiring. But again, if this is your first amp, you might want to go the circuit board route, and it's going to be a similar build but different. So anyway, I think this is going to be a fun series. Hopefully you'll follow along with me, even if you aren't going to build it, because I think you may learn a thing or two about just amp design and building and stuff. I'm probably going to kind of do a pretty detailed thing of at least fabrication work on one of the chassis. The other one's just going to be the mirror, and then the wiring's probably going to be the same way, where I'll kind of show you more detail on the wiring. Oh, and again, think ahead. If you don't have like a supply of tag strips at home, you probably want to get some tag strips if you're building this point to point. And of course, you're going to need some hardware and stuff. If you're like me, you probably aren't going to be able to do this just with one order. You're going to get halfway through the build and go, oh man, I forgot to get blah, blah, blah. And, I know some people really hate paying shipping, but I've just kind of learned that that's just part of the deal, that it's almost impossible to order everything all at once on the front end of a build like this. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying this content and you'll enjoy this series. If you are, hit the bell so that you get notifications when the new videos are uploaded. Please subscribe to the channel so that you can see all the new content we're coming up with. I think we're ready to kick this thing back into high gear again. And again, I think this is going to be a fun build that is going to have a little more power. It'll give me a chance to really test out like the GR Research speakers I built that are pretty low efficiency, that these single in amps really can't drive good. So I can listen to speakers like that and see what they sound like. I've got another pair of DIY speakers that are going to be similar to those as far as efficiency. So I need to get an amp that can drive them before I actually build them, so we can actually test them and listen to them. And that's all going to be new content that's going to be coming up this summer. So anyway, again, if you're enjoying this, subscribe. Probably going to be next week when the parts get here, before I start actually building this thing. And until then, have a great day.